Welcome to week 9 of organic world building. We're starting to get into the final stretch, and with that, we're going to want to take a look at lighting and how that's going to affect our environments and really help sell them to be really dynamic spaces. So let's check out what we're going to be learning this week. So we're going to start off by going over some of the principles of lighting. We're just going to talk about things that will really help boost your understanding of lighting in an environment and how not only films, but games as well, utilize different techniques to emphasize their lighting, change their entire scene around with just some lighting, mood, atmosphere, and even color keys. We're gonna then take a look at the lighting basics in Unreal. We're gonna start putting in things like atmospheric fog to kind of get the effect of the atmosphere in our level. We're going to be adding in skylights to kind of really help lighten up some of the darker areas of our scene so they're not just all harshly contrasting and really dark and losing those details. We're also going to look at Unreal's Blueprint Sky Dome, which will allow us to add in some basic clouds and allow us to change the direction of our directional light and update the material in real time to have the kind of same time of day effect that you would expect with the light angle that you're getting from your sun. We're then going to be taking a look at Unreal's fog systems and how we can utilize those to add atmosphere to our scenes. We're going to be looking at the differences between height and volumetric fog and the benefit both can bring to our scene. We're going to be going over how to create and import custom light maps into Unreal. We'll be taking a look at how to set up a light map in Maya and how we can utilize our original UV channels to give us a good head start on creating our custom light maps and the pitfalls of keeping things too split up. We'll also look at light mass importance volumes and how this is going to help us increase bake times and increase our speed of production and quality when working in Unreal. Finally, we're going to look at Unreal's post-processing volume and look at all the benefits that can really bring to our scene to kind of enhance different aspects in certain spots. We're going to be taking a look at things like bloom, color grading, white balance, different types of saturation, lens effects, all these little extra add-ons you can do to help sell your scene and give it that little extra pop that'll really help it stand out from its own. All right, so we got a lot of lights to cover. Let's jump into it. Let's now take a look at how lighting, fog, and post can all affect our scenes and give us a great sense of mood, establishment, and place to the world we're building. Now, lighting is one of the biggest keys to any good-looking environment. Strong lighting can actually take a scene that is slightly weaker and really kind of punch it up and make it a more impressive and dynamic scene than it would be with just, say, your models and assets. Much like a really good shader and texture can make a lackluster model appear higher quality than it is, lighting can do the same for your environment. It can really dynamically bring up the kind of mood and atmosphere and the punch to your environment. Conversely, bad lighting can also make your really good models, your really good textures, your great layout look terrible and fall really flat. So we're going to go over some keys that should hopefully help you kind of punch up your lighting and give a good sense of just atmosphere and mood to your scene. Now, working with lighting can be tricky for environments, especially with this class starting right now and being so late into the class. Normally when working with an environment, I like to set up the kind of lighting and basic lighting of what I want early on in the project. However, with something like this, where you're trying to teach students so many different topics and techniques throughout the entire process, it's hard to get to everything all in one without overwhelming people. So just keep this in mind and these tips in mind for your next project going forward, and try to establish some of the mood that you want in your scene early on. And then, of course, you can like fine tune and tweak it. But getting some kind of basic lighting in your scenes generally can really help you along in the process. When dealing with lighting in the Unreal Engine and setting your mood and atmosphere, the main three things we are going to be able to help establish our scene are lighting, fog, and post, all three of which we can control in Unreal. They give us the ability to create mood and atmosphere. Different types of lights, kind of scene colors, densities of fog, and extra post effects can really help create a varied mood for whatever your scene is. It can create an atmosphere of high tension, of a murky swamp area, a foggy forest, or a crystal clear blue sunny sky. It can help us establish a sense of place and feeling. Giving a certain kind of emphasis of color can help emphasize where in the world your scene is. If you have a lot of kind of yellows and oranges, it can really help it feel like a sense of a desert. It can give this kind of bright, deserty feel to it. Whereas something that has a bit more green and a bit more grounded in reality feeling and a lot less saturated colors can give you that kind of maybe old war, World War II feeling to it. So utilizing lighting, fog, and post is a great way to help establish these. It can also help us find a balance between the light and the dark, and that's one of the keys in lighting. When you're lighting a scene, you don't want to just have everything washed out in sunlight. You also don't want to have everything in shadow, as you lose a lot of your forms in those shadows. So whenever lighting a scene, I always try and strike a balance in any of the compositions that I'm making to have a really nice balance of half in sunlight and half in shadow. Of course, this is going to change if you're on a foggy day and there isn't a lot of shadow, but if that is the case, then you need to play with other elements in the scene, such as more fog, more atmosphere, more even particle effects to really help separate your scene and separate the individual pieces. This can not only help separate these different areas, but it can also help draw the viewer in. Utilizing your lighting to emphasize specific areas is a great way to pull the viewer and draw the eye in. Having really eerie and moody scenes can also help draw the viewer in, even when you don't have a direct sunlight to shine on your kind of focal area. You can use trees in a deep foggy forest and have them create a sense of a clearing in specific areas to help draw the viewer towards those essential lighter moments in your scene. Fog can also help us de-emphasize specific areas of our scene, as well as lighting can. Fog for this, however, is great as you can utilize it to kind of wash out specific areas that you don't want to be overly emphasized and in your face. And it can help, again, draw the viewer into specific areas of your scene. If you have some heavy fog in the background, you're going to be more drawn into the foreground of your scene. Equally, if you have heavy fog on the kind of ground floor around like the player's feet, that can also help draw you into those areas of fog, as you're going to have a high contrast of fog around the player's feet and the just normal atmosphere sky that has less fog in it. So utilizing either fog to de-emphasize areas of your scene or actually draw the viewer into specific areas is a great way to go about doing it. One of the concepts most often overlooked when students are dealing with an environment is looking for a color key and create one for their environment. This is an extremely common process that's done in not only films such as Mad Max: Fury Road here, but also it's done highly in games. Anytime you're working with a concept, you're going to get a color key that's going to highlight all the important colors that are in your scene. And establishing this can help not only the lighting of the scene, but also what kind of textures you are utilizing in your scene. We can then use post effects to help de-emphasize some colors. So if you say you have a lot of red flowers in your environment, but the kind of look and color key you have is kind of really fading back on the reds, maybe it's more emphasizing some of the lavender or blue flowers you have in your scene, we can utilize post to help tone down those reds and punch up the blues and violets without having to essentially redo your textures. This is extremely important when working in games, as oftentimes you're going to be sharing assets throughout different departments. Other people are going to be utilizing the same assets you are for their levels, and they might have a totally different and unique mood and color palette for their scene. So you don't want to just change every texture all the time to get the look you need when other people can use it. The same can be said for even your own environment spaces. It's a great way to kind of create different looks within the one environment you made. You could create a snowy scene and, it's has a really desaturated look to it. It's in a forest maybe, there's not a lot of colors, it's really kind of moody and somber. Then in another part of your environment that you're building, it could still be that same snowy scene. However, you might want to punch up some of the colors. Maybe you have some bits of grass in there, some flowers, some foliage that has these pops of colors that you can then emphasize based on whatever your kind of color key is and really heighten this up. Now, for this class, you don't need to go ahead and establish a color key. However, it is a good idea to try and think of the main colors you want to sell in your environment. These can change throughout any kind of production you're doing, but kind of understanding where you want your scene to go and what the look you want to have can really help out. In the Mad Max example here, the main kind of colors are the blue and the yellow, which are a very kind of common cinematic look. It's the most appealing, complementary colors, having lots of blues, having lots of oranges and yellows in there. So you're getting a lot of this, and it gives this really nice pop. All the other colors, like you're not seeing many greens or even reds. It's all of these blues and oranges, and they're really pushed to the extremes, and it gives this really nice pop. And for this film, it worked out really well. So just think about that when you're doing your environment. Now, if we're looking at something from Lord of the Rings, we start off in Hobbiton in the Shire, and it's a really friendly, really nice kind of tranquil time. A lot of the colors are over exaggerated. They're super saturated, and there's not only super saturated colors, but there's a lot of them. We can see lots of yellows and reds and purples and blues. They're all really bright and colorful, and it sells this kind of feeling of happiness. And just with the sky and the, kind of grass that has this nice warm tone to it, it gives us this warm, inviting feeling in this really happy place. It feels like somewhere that you would want to live and have a party and smoke a pipe with a whole bunch of hobbits. So creating these types of moods throughout your scene can really draw the viewer in. It can give that sense of place. When I see this, I understand kind of where this is, and it's someplace that's full of joy and, happiness and inviting, and someplace that I would want to be. Conversely, we can see Minas Tirith from the same movie, Lord of the Rings, and it has a much different feeling. It has a much more somber feeling. There is a drastic drop-off in the saturation and colors used throughout this space. We're also seeing a different type of sky. It's very cloudy and moody and foreboding. The just lack of saturation just gives this kind of uneasy, unhappy feeling. This, massive castle town is on the outskirts of Mount Doom, just this, terrifying, fiery brimstone place that's really not a fun. So increasing the just lack of saturation throughout this scene is giving it, a less inviting feeling. It's very one-dimensional, very lack of tonality throughout the scene, and it gives that kind of more foreboding feeling. It just doesn't feel like it's a welcoming place. It's not as happy, not as bright and joyful. And so we're getting these really nice different looks, even though, they are still in the same world itself. So creating those different types of moods are really going to help your environment. Playing with the different colors in your scene can really help emphasize the entire environment. Not only that, but we can also use our lighting to do the same. In the Shire, we had, more warm colors, a warmer light, and it's not as harsh. It's giving these nice kind of highlights along this ridge here that give this more warm glow. Again, it's more inviting. The lighting, the post, the FX, it's all just helping give that inviting feeling. Whereas we come here to Gondor and we have this, harsher lighting. It's just a lot stronger. The shadows aren't too dark. They've lightened the shadows up, but still adding that really huge highlight along the castle, the walled city, is really emphasizing this area and just making it just this harsher, kind of just less inviting place you want to go to. So we can utilize light and color to really help sell our scenes. Not only can lighting and color help emphasize and give a sense of place to our environments, but so can fog. Here's an example from the new Blade Runner movie where they're utilizing this heavy fog to really give a sense of place in the world where this is. You know, it's a kind of dusty, miney place with a lot of heavy fog. It's not bright and cheery. It's not a happy place. And we can also see that they are utilizing the fog to give some really nice separation to this environment. The background drops instantly into fog, and it leaves all the foreground actors and sets really in your main view. It really highlights them, whereas everything else in the background really just kind of falls to the back. But you still get this sense of, you can see the shapes and the silhouettes in there, and you can kind of feel what this landscape is. It's very barren. There's not a lot of plant life, a lot of foliage, not a lot of people living here. So it's helping establish the mood as well as emphasizing our actor, our tree, and then our little building here. It's emphasizing everything in the foreground. And here's another image from Blade Runner where we do something completely different. The scene has essentially one tonal color throughout. It's this very sandy kind of orange, and it's using extreme fog to really just kind of wash out a lot of the scene and emphasize just a few silhouetted subjects. We see our main character in the frame, as well as these large statues of these kind of women and their shoes. They are really not emphasizing a lot of the detail on them because they are using the fog just to really get the kind of color and silhouetted shapes in here. It can create a really dynamic and really eye-catching scene. So utilizing fog, color can really help bring these kind of elements together. You don't always need wall-to-wall detail to sell something that's really interesting and provocative. The scene doesn't have a lot of detail in it, and yet it's really invoking and really draws the viewer in. Now, another thing we can talk about is kind of post and what is referred to in the film industry as color grading. And that's when you are taking a image or a film that you've recorded and you are changing the look of it, utilizing different parameters in your post effects to really change the entire mood of the scene. In games, this is normally just referred to as LUTs. I believe that's done the same as film as well. But a LUT, which is a capital L-U-T, stands for lookup table. And we're going to get more into depth about how to create one in Unreal. But what you can see here is the original footage shot for Mad Max is the bottom one here. And it's this kind of bright sunny day. Everything's really dirty. But the post effects that they did on the film to get the final shot of changing the tone, making it extremely blue, giving it this kind of midnight twilight feeling, just, overemphasized, of course, but it gives this sense of this truck that's barreling through the desert is doing it in just bright twilight, that the entire sky is super dusty and dirty, and it just helps brighten the sky into this really crazy blue. And so you can utilize a lot of techniques in Unreal to do this and get these kind of really cool effects. You're not stuck with whatever you've just built, but you can get some really nice, really exaggerated and over-the-top post-FX looks. We can also see a bit more of a subtle one here with the Matrix. Now the bottom one is the original shot with no post-FX, no kind of color grading at all. And then the top is when the kind of final post effects has been taken. It's a bit more contrasty. The entire scene has a bit more of a green tint to it, as that was very much the kind of style and color of the movie to give this kind of artificial feeling to it. So even subtle ones like this can really help sell the difference in your scene. And so when we think of all these concepts, from lighting to fog to kind of post with color grading, we can really get a sense that we can change our entire environment fairly easy and give a dramatically different look and feel and result to what we want to achieve and show off to the viewer. including some of these post effects to really kind of punch up your scene and make it have a different feeling. It doesn't need to just always feel like it's a bright sunny day and this is what, my wood or my metal material is obviously going to look like and what these trees are going to look like on a sunny day. You can really change up the mood and feeling and get a great sense of place and purpose throughout your environment by just changing up a few things. I will say, however, though, it is a good idea to kind of include potentially a kind of render of your final scene in a more natural, neutral lighting where it's not too crazy and heavy on post. As if you go too heavy on post, a lot of studios might think you're just kind of trying to cover up something. Adding in all those extra artistic flares can be seen as trying to cover up any kind of mistakes or unfinished work you're doing. So you'll want to find that balance between the two. Now that we're back in Unreal, let's actually go over some of the lighting tools and properties and things we want to keep aware of when we're creating lighting for our scene. So here in my scene, it's changed a bit from the previous lesson. Really all that's really different is that I swapped out the grass kind of textures with some more snowy versions of them to get that kind of spring snow look that, a bunch of snow has just recently fallen and the grass is still there. And of course adding the same slope shader onto, for the trees as well to get that kind of heavier snow effect on them. So again, even starting out at this kind of like nice first pass base, we don't have all of the detail assets that you would need in there to really kind of pop your scene and make it look really cool. We can start on the lighting for our environment on just this kind of nice base foundation that we've established in the previous weeks. So I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to remove some of these just lighting sources that are already in the scene. They kind of just came in there and we want to get rid of them so we can know what to do and how to kind of work around some of these things. So let's just get rid of the sky sphere and the skylight. So we basically have a scene right now that all it has is one light source, which is a directional light source. Right here. You can just easily search the light source and you can just drag and drop that in. And there's nothing too crazy about this. You can see we have just super dark shadows, blown out kind of like lighting here and no sky at all. Everything is just black. And this is kind of how you would come into any scene if you're starting from the absolute basic scratch. We are, of course, using a directional light as when dealing with an organic outdoor environment, generally you're going to be dealing with one primary light source, which is going to be the sun. And if we put that in our scene, it's very easy to just kind of rotate around and see where the light is heading. As a directional light, there's no need to worry about where it's positioned in the world, as it's always just going to be pointing one way, and really the only thing you really need to worry about is just the angle that you have the light and which direction it's pointing. So now that we're at like the default with just our directional light, we're going to want to start to add in some abilities to actually get a sky in there and kind of fake whatever our atmosphere is going to be. And to do that, the most easy way is to come under the visual effects tab and grab in an atmospheric fog actor. Now this is going to essentially fake the effect of a sky and essentially the atmosphere on a normal planet somewhere like Earth, and it'll open up all these different controls that we can just kind of mess around with. So as we can see, Unreal does a really nice job of just kind of getting in some kind of skybox in there. It doesn't really have any clouds right now, but we're not going to worry about that. We just want to focus on some of the other kind of guiding principles of this. So we have a sun in there, and we can just mess around with some of these multipliers. Like we can increase the sun itself so it just seems brighter in the sky. We can increase the fog multiplier throughout here. So it's just creating a denser kind of atmospheric fog. When you're further away from things, they kind of just fade into some nice fog in there. We can also increase the density of that. The kind of scaling of where the horizon line is going to be. So, you increase the density scale here and it starts to get more lower down. The atmosphere is kind of like lower to the earth. It's great for if you're up high in the sky and you want to have this kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm a bit more in the clouds, essentially. You can do the same with the kind of altitude scale, which will really kind of just crush it down and bring it down to giving this kind of like over the planet Earth look. We've got the atmosphere itself is way down here at this blue horizon line, and this rest up here, this kind of black, is kind of giving that space effect. So it's a great way if you're working on something that's maybe if you were on a space station or kind of in the clouds, and you want that feeling of, hey, my environment is like really kind of poking up into the clouds, high into the atmosphere. So those are two great options, just kind of like mess around with. And then of course you can start the distance of where that kind of fog is in relation to just the height. And so if we just start to drop this down, we're starting to get more atmosphere and more fog into our scene overall. And then our sun disk scale will just help kind of blow out how big this sun is. We can increase the brightness. We then can come down to this next panel and actually disable the sun disk entirely. If we don't want it in the scene, if we just want the light from it, we can have that. And of course, we can come down to the rendering and turn off visible, and it'll just hide our atmospheric fog. So these are some great things to just kind of mess around with, just get used to getting some kind of base fog in there, and it'll just allow you to kind of understand what's really kind of going on. Now that we have some basic just atmosphere in our scene and we have a sky essentially, we can now come in and drag in our skylight that'll help lighten up a lot of these dark shadowed areas. We of course don't want them to be kind of crushed down into these blacks, as we do want to see some of that and give that sense of bounce light. So we're just going to kind of drag this into our scene, and you can see instantly it lightens up a lot of these areas. They become visible once again. They might still be pretty dark, and we want to like tweak those values, but just instantly placing that in our scene is going to help lighten up any of our shadowed areas. You will want to be careful with the skylight, as if you increase the intensity too much, a lot of your shapes in shadows will just kind of get lost and it'll all kind of bleed together. But you can of course come through here and just kind of mess around with the intensity to find something that you like. You can see that you can blow the scene out entirely and almost remove the shadows completely. This is actually helpful if you're kind of like in a foggy scene and you just don't want the shadows to be too dark. But let's just set it to maybe 1.5, as it's still getting us some nice darks in our scene. We also have the ability to put in a cube map in our skylight to kind of give the bounce effect of the skylight in those shadowed areas, the details that we have from our cube map. Now, normally this is more beneficial for scenes that are going to have a lot of nice reflections in there, and so in the shadows you're still going to want some of those reflections from the cube map. To do that, you just have to come down here to the drop box and drop it down to specified cube map. Otherwise, it's just capturing the cube map of the scene. So if you do want to specify it, you just need to find it in your content browser. I just saved one off here for testing. And then you can see now we have this new cube map in there. That's actually helping out quite a lot. It's bringing, a lot less of the blues in there and getting more of what this texture is. This is just one of the default Unreal kind of cube maps. I believe it's outside their office. But you can see how the differences that can make. If we just go back to the captured scene, we have a bit more blue in there. So utilizing cube maps, you can get a lot of different cool effects and looks. The next most important thing you want to look at is the light color of your skylight. This can greatly affect kind of what the shadows are and really just what's in the shadows. It'll allow you to kind of give a different feeling and mood to your environment if you need to specify what the shadows are, as well as darken them up as well. You can also darken the shadows by just dropping it down closer to a black value. But if you just kind of increase the saturation in some of these areas, you can really dramatically change how your skylight is affecting your scene and what kind of shadow color you want. We don't necessarily need to have this kind of cool blue in there, but we can make it more of a warm yellow look. We can also turn off the ability for whether the light is actually casting shadows, and that'll help lighten up the scene as well. We potentially don't want the skylight to cast its own shadows, as it could just further increase the intensity of them and just really kind of crush down a lot of these blacks. We have a few more options, such as the kind of lower hemisphere color. And what that is it's essentially the light that's kind of bouncing up from the bottom of your screen, kind of upwards. So we can see this, let's change it to maybe a purpley color. So it looks like the light is kind of coming from underneath the ground, bouncing upwards. This can cause some issues where you can see this grass kind of got this weird color to it now, but if you do keep it in the kind of subtle range, you can add a bit more, kind of accents and colors underneath your kind of like lighting setup. So if you need colors to kind of bounce up from the ground up towards something, so like the underneath sides of these tree canopies, that's a great way to go about doing that. And that's pretty much all for the main kind of effects of the skylight. It's really there to just kind of help lighten up a lot of those shadows and give you the ability to not just be stuck with just kind of blacks all over. And it's kind of helping such a large environment space kind of get all of that bounce light that you would need and you would expect in a normal outdoor environment. Now, another thing we might want to look at for our environments is actually a Unreal created blueprint, and that's the BP Sky Sphere. Now, if we just drag and drop this into our environment, things are going to get a little blown out. But we can come down and start messing around with some of these intensities, as well as the atmospheric fog can affect this quite a bit. So let's just reset this down. And so now we're back to kind of like what we should have as a default kind of setting. So we'll come to the sky sphere, and what's nice is you can just easily just click in the sky and it'll select it. And what the sky sphere is trying to do is it's trying to emulate the sky's environment based on the lighting direction of your light source. So our light source was our directional light, and we can attach the sky sphere to that, so every time we move the light, we can refresh this material and get the effect that the sky is rotating, and the colors will automatically be based around whatever that sky color is. So we'll just attach it to our light source, as it's the only one we have here that's a directional light. We'll just attach it, and now our sky is connected to it, and we have this kind of nice little cloud, blue sky environment. It's pretty simple, but it gives you a lot of really nice just ability to have a sky and an environment, some kind of clouds in there, instead of just having, the atmospheric fog look of just a flat color. So if we go ahead and like rotate our light, we'll be able to see the effect that this has. So we rotate the light, and you can kind of see, hopefully, I'm not sure on your screen, but if you look in the middle, you can kind of see this like bright area where the sun is. It's kind of rotating across the sky. It's the only way to really tell exactly where the sky is, unfortunately, when you have the blueprinted sky sphere on. But if you come back to it and you click refresh material, it'll update and show you where the sky is, as well as start to change the color. So this is a great way to really just kind of hone in what kind of color you want. It's unfortunate that they don't update in real time, but there are some nicer kind of sky packages you can purchase on the marketplace if you really need that kind of look. But, just kind of coming back to it and then just refreshing the material to see where your sky is and like kind of what the look is going to be changing to isn't like the most troublesome thing. It can give you some good looks here. We've got this nice, sunset effect. So you don't really need to kind of come in and tweak all these settings to try and get this look. It really helps you go a long way and does this for you. Some of the options are, of course, maybe increasing the sun brightness. And what it's doing is it's multiplying it over the sun that we already have in our atmospheric fog and kind of blowing it out. It helps just, again, accentuate that atmospheric color and look. And it looks like there's more atmosphere now, when before, we just kind of had this, pretty stark circle, and it's a pretty hard edge. There's no kind of bleed off to it. So this just helps give more of the effect that the light is penetrating through an atmosphere itself. We, of course, have clouds, which we can increase the opacity of, just so we get like the effect. Different times of day are going to have different preset kind of cloud looks. So we can just increase them just to get a bit more clouds and, again, a bit more atmosphere throughout our environment. This, in addition to our atmospheric fog, can really help sell and ground our environment to the world. We can also increase even the speed at which kind of these clouds are moving through the environment. They move dynamically, which is really nice. And so, the higher you set it up, the more they're actually going to start to pan across the screen. And this is great if you want to get, different looks, or kind of set it up so that it's got a time of day and the sky moves across the sky. That you can all set up in kind of these blueprints. We also have the star brightness. So if you do set your light source to kind of be, a nighttime setting, there should be some stars that start to kind of like really pop out in the sky. So you can get those really cool effects, and then we can kind of increase the brightness of them, and already we've got this really nice environment. You will have to be careful, as sometimes your subsurface scattering color might need to be adjusted, as right now it is kind of glowing and like razor hot, so you might need to adjust some of those settings to kind of nail things down. Now, if you do want your sky sphere to actually base its colors off of whatever you choose, still have the kind of cloud effects, and no longer kind of dynamically update for whatever time of day it is, you can actually turn off colors determined by the sun's position. So if we turn this off, now it's just going to use these kind of override colors, these, changing the kind of zenith color of our sky, so we can get a bunch of different looks. And of course, kind of coming down, changing the horizon color as well. So those are great ways to do that if you want to change them dynamically. However, you are going to be in that situation where if you do rotate the kind of sun, it's not going to essentially follow along with the time of day anymore. So you do kind of have to choose one or the other if it's going to either be, you want it to be based off whatever your light angle is, to have, that more realistic kind of exact precise look of whatever the sky color should be, or if you want to be able to control it yourself and choose any one of those options. You can override the cloud color, the overall kind of color of the entire sky, the horizon color, the zenith color, which is up top here. So it gives you a lot of options to still have those kind of nice dynamic clouds that are shifting through the space. But it just loses that ability to easily just rotate your spotlight or your directional light and then have the skybox itself just adjust and update, which is great if you are just trying to really nail in, find what kind of mood you want really quickly. And then you can obviously turn it off and then go ahead and tweak all those settings to get your desired results. Now, before we can really get into lighting our scene and adding our artistic flavors to it, we need to quickly go over light maps, how they're made, and some of the important key points you want to keep across all of your light maps. So light maps are essentially a secondary UV channel on your mesh asset. And what it's going to do is, in Unreal, it's going to come to bake time, and when the lighting is baked for your level, it's going to create a much smaller texture for every individual asset that is flagged for light maps and build a really low res texture to get all that really nice